Hi guys, Miss Belcher here, and I am here to talk to you today about your upcoming assessment. Now, usually after every single unit in science, we are going to have a test. However, with scientific inquiry, it's going to look a little bit different. So, for this unit, we are going to write a lab report to figure out if all this stuff that we've been doing lately has helped us grow as little scientists. So, within this lab report, what's really, really cool is that you are going to come up with your own science lab. Now, what's really neat about this is it can be about whatever you would like. However, while this should be very fun, this should also be something that's very organized, neat, and professional. I want you to go ahead and read over your creative cover page as well as your introduction. All right, great, you're back. So I just want to highlight a few points. Here on the introduction, it's important that you notice that we are going to be doing the purpose of this lab. So the purpose for your lab should kind of explain, why am I doing this lab in the first place? What am I trying to prove to everybody? And that will kind of lead you into the background information. Now, background information, you may have to do a little bit of research. So go online, see what information is out there. See if something like this has been tested before. If so, maybe tweak that lesson in order to create a new lab. All right, now at this time, I want you to go ahead and pause your video and read experimental design and about the hypothesis. Great, glad you're back. Now, within the experimental design section, you are going to talk about the testable question, the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control group. Now, what's really easy about this section is we have had lots of practice with all of these mini labs. The next section is about your hypothesis. We all know by now that our hypothesis has to be an if, then, because statement. Remember the saying, if IV, then DV, because something smart. Now, go ahead, pause your video, and read over the test section. Here we're starting to get a little bit trickier. Great. So now, in this test section, there's two important pieces. The first one is a bulleted list of materials. Now, within that, you need to make sure that you include absolutely everything that a scientist would need in order to perform this lab again. So, make sure you include things such as pencils, how many items that you need, so on and so forth. You also need to include a list of steps in a very specific order. For instance, if you're trying to measure baking soda into a graduated cylinder, you would first have to say, step 1, measure 20 milliliters of baking soda into a measuring device. Then, step 2, pour your baking soda into your graduated cylinder. Now, these steps are really, really important. If you do not write down every single step, someone else may interpret your steps a little bit differently, causing the lab to be a whole new lab. So make sure you're writing it down very specifically. Next, go ahead and read the observations section of your lab report. All right, great. So in the observation section, you have read that we're doing 3 different things. 1, creating our data table. 2, putting a graph in for representing our data, depending on what your data actually is, will depend on what type of graph. And the last thing that you will need to do is this bottom part. This part where it says diagram of experiment. Now, in order to help people perform the same lab that you did, if you take pictures and include that within your lab report, it's going to be a lot easier for other students to follow along. So if you have your phone, you're able to take pictures as you do your experiment. That would be a nice and easy way for you to represent different or more difficult concepts. Go ahead and read the discussion section, and I will be talking to you soon. Glad you're back. Now, in this discussion piece, I would say this is probably one of the most difficult sections. In the discussion section, you need to explain your results. Now, this is kind of like the so part in our conclusion. However, we are going to dive in a little bit farther. We are going to describe why this data was important, We're going to talk about any weaknesses or problems or errors that occurred within our experiment, and also ways that we could maybe change our experiment for next time, or ways that we could just improve the same exact experiment. Maybe you forgot to do a particular constant that you should have considered earlier on in your lab. So here we're really explaining our results, opposed to the last section where we just wanted to display the results. So discussion, you're explaining your results, whereas in the last section, you're just displaying your results. Go ahead and read the conclusion, and that will sum up the lab report. All right, in the conclusion, it's going to be very similar to the conclusions that we have been working on in class. So the first statement that you need to make is, my data does or does not support my hypothesis. And then the second statement is the when, then, so. So remember to use those same features that we've been working on in class, and we're going to elaborate even more on the conclusion. So for instance, this one right here tells us that we need to identify limitations. Now, sometimes things are out of our control. For instance, if you are going outside and you are throwing a ball in the air, maybe there's a gust of wind that comes by at the same exact time. Maybe that gust of wind affected your data. That's where we could include that within our conclusion. Also, we can generate new questions. Now that we have created this experiment, what's something else that you want to figure out that relates to this? Maybe it made your mind just think a little bit harder and developed a few more questions. That's what you are going to include in the conclusion section. The very last section is the bibliography section, which I forgot to underline here. Now, this bibliography is similar to maybe bibliographies that you have done in the past. Any information that you pulled from an outside resource, such as the internet, a textbook, or some other form of information, you need to include within that bibliography. I'm going to be spending a little bit of time in class to talk about your bibliographies. Besides that, the only other thing that I want to talk about is right here. It says that reports should be written in the similar format that the lab report's displayed in. So how my headings were bolded and underlined, I'm going to help you format it and make it all pretty as well. The last thing that's attached is your scoring rubric. So feel free to take a look at that. And if you have any questions at all, I want you to come and see me. Besides that, I hope you enjoy this, and I hope you have a lot of fun. There's one more thing that I forgot to mention. Now, some of you may be thinking, oh my goodness, this is an intense lab report. We have so much to do, and I don't even know where to start. What's going to be really, really nice for you over the next couple of weeks, I am going to give you one task at a time. So don't look at it as an entire lab report. We're going to be working on just the introduction one day and just the experimental design one day, so on and so forth. So do not be overwhelmed.